Welcome back. Today I'm going to talk about Chapter 4 in the textbook, Development Across the Lifespan. One way of organizing the study of human development is to divide it into three domains or realms. The physical domain, the cognitive domain, how we think, and the socio-emotional domain, how we interact with others and how we feel. Prenatal, or before birth development, can be divided into three periods. The first period is the germinal period, which lasts from the day of conception for approximately 2 weeks. During this time, we grow from a single-celled organism to one with multiple cells, but not differentiated cells. That is, we are composed entirely of stem cells until we reach the embryonic period, which is, again, approximately 2 weeks after conception. Amazingly, at this very early stage of development, we start to develop different organ systems. That is, the stem cells divide into different kinds of cells which make up the various tissues and ultimately organs within the body. This period lasts from approximately 3 weeks after conception until approximately 8 weeks. The final prenatal period is the fetal period, which lasts approximately from 8 or 9 weeks after conception until birth. The prenatal period is both an exciting but also potentially dangerous period in our development. During this time, the developing individual may be exposed to various teratogens, which are substances that might harm development. For the first 2 weeks, that is the germinal period, these teratogens will not damage specific organ systems because, of course, there are no separate organ systems. All cells are stem cells. However, during this time, teratogens can cause miscarriage. Beginning with the embryonic period, teratogens can damage different structures or organ systems within the body, and the chart on the screen here lists some of these and the times at which they are most at risk. Teratogens are any environmental substance that can harm prenatal development, and the term comes from the Greek word tera, which means monster. Common teratogens include alcohol and various recreational and even prescription and over-the-counter medications. Women who drink alcohol when pregnant are at risk of having a child with fetal alcohol syndrome. This chart lists a number of teratogens and their possible effects. Remember that this is not an exhaustive chart and that there are other types of teratogens that may cause damage to the embryo or fetus. After we're born, we have a period during which we may experience amazing levels of growth and development. However, this does depend on the environment in which we're raised. The children in the top picture, labeled A here, are in an orphanage in which they receive very little contact with adults. Contrast that with the environment seen in picture C below. The effects of neglect by caregivers can be extreme. Note the figure in the middle of the page, figure B, and see the difference in size of brains for a normal 3-year-old child and one who has been neglected. Brain growth during this period occurs in 2 ways. First, axons become myelinated, and second, neurons form connections with other neurons, which are known as synapses. Until the 1950s in this country, It was largely assumed that children didn't need any kind of emotional connection with their parents. All that was necessary was to meet their basic physical needs for food and shelter. This idea changed after a series of important experiments carried out by Harry Harlow in the 1950s with monkeys. Harlow raised infant monkeys with two substitute mothers rather than their biological mothers. One of the substitute mothers was covered in wire mesh and provided milk through a bottle. The other did not provide milk but was covered in a soft cloth. What Harlow found was that when frightened, the baby monkeys would run not to the mother that provided food, but to the other one, providing what he termed contact comfort. One of the people who was very much influenced by Harlow's research was the American psychologist Mary Ainsworth, who created the strange situation test. This test is designed to measure the type of attachment that an infant or toddler has with their primary caregiver. The test has several steps. First, mother, usually the mother, and the child go into a room that contains a number of toys. The child, who at this point is approximately 11 to 13 months of age, at least in the original experiments, has an opportunity to play with the toys, and then the mother leaves for a period of time, and finally mom comes back. 3 patterns of attachment were measured by Ainsworth in these experiments. In the first pattern, the secure attachment, the child plays easily with the toys, gets upset when mother leaves, but is easily comforted when she comes back. In the second pattern, the avoidant attachment, the child pretty much ignores their mom, plays with the toys, and then doesn't pay much attention when mom leaves or when she comes back. The final pattern, the ambivalent pattern, is characterized by a conflicting reaction. The child gets upset when mom leaves, and when she returns, is both clingy and distressed. That is, they communicate through their actions something along the lines of, "Come here, I hate you." Fortunately, the most common pattern of attachment observed is that of the secure child. One of the key cognitive developmental milestones is that of developing a theory of mind. This is the understanding that other people have intentions and belief and knowledge that is different than our own. One way to measure this is something called the Smarties test. Smarties are England's version of M&M candies, and they come in a box. The test works like this. Child comes into a room, and the researcher opens a box of Smarties, pours out the candy, and replaces it with pencils. The child is then asked, what will happen if another child comes into the room now? What will they think is in the box? If the child has developed theory of mind, they will understand that the new child does not know what's in the box and will think that there's still Smarties in there. On the other hand, a child who has not developed theory of mind will assume that other people know what they know and will say, well, duh, pencils. One of the most important theorists about the development of cognitive processes in humans was the Swiss biologist Jean Piaget. Piaget described thinking in terms of a series of 4 stages of development. And during each of these stages, there is a qualitative difference in how children think about the world. One of Piaget's most important contributions was the development of the idea of schemas, which are ways that we organize and interpret the world. Schemas change over time through the processes of assimilation and accommodation. Assimilation is when we incorporate new information into an existing schema, and accommodation is when we change a schema or even create a brand new one to incorporate new information about the world that doesn't fit into our existing schemas. He also describes these 4 stages of cognitive development. In the sensory motor stage, which lasts from approximately birth to 2 years, children develop an understanding of themselves and their surroundings largely through happenstance and trial and error. During this stage, at approximately 6 to 9 months of age, Piaget thought approximately 9 months. New theorists have shown that it's much earlier. The child will develop object permanence, the notion that objects exist even when you cannot see them. The next stage is the preoperational stage, which runs from about 2 to 7 years. During this time, children increasingly use more sophisticated language and representational thought. They're able to plan their actions before engaging in them. Importantly, this is when theory of mind tends to develop, and also children develop more capacity for empathy. However, their cognitive abilities are still somewhat limited. Egocentrism is the tendency to believe that the way they see the world is the way that it is, and that other people's perspectives shouldn't be different than theirs. This gradually goes away during this stage as children develop theory of mind. Centration is the inability to see changes in physical objects across more than one dimension simultaneously. Let me show you an example. A 4-year-old is shown 2 rows of marbles. Each row has the same number of marbles, but one row is spread out. When asked which row has more marbles, the 4-year-old says the longer row. In this case, he fails to show conservation of number. That is, the child cannot attend to number and spacing at the same time. However, this capacity to decentrate or attend to more than one thing at a time is not absolute. If you give the child a strategy, that is, count the marbles in each row, they no longer are limited by their centered thinking. Another example is the classic water glass test. A preoperational child will see 2 glasses which are containing the same amount of water. The researcher will pour the water from one into a second glass, which is taller but thinner, and the preoperational child will say, well, there's more water in the tall glass because it's taller, not able to simultaneously understand height and width. The third stage is the concrete operational stage, which lasts from approximately 7 to 12 years. In this stage, children understand the law of conservation and are not fooled by those centration problems that we just discussed. Therefore, they are able to understand about concrete ideas and actions in the world. So they can learn about subjects connected to the physical world, such as arithmetic and reading, but are typically not ready for more abstract subjects such as algebra and literary analysis. In the fourth stage, formal operations, adolescents can engage in logico-deductive reasoning. They can use general principles to determine specific truths, enabling them to engage in more abstract thought. Not everybody uses formal operations thinking all the time. But when we do, we're able to do things like geometry, sociology, philosophy, and political science. One of the skills that most of us develop over time is language. Language is an organic process, and we are all born with the capacity to learn multiple languages. Which one we develop depends on the language that we hear and experience in our everyday lives. As we get older, we lose the capacity to make sounds in languages that we have not heard. Therefore, when we try to learn a second or third or additional language as an adult, it is very difficult, if not impossible, to pronounce the sounds in that language which are discrepant from our first language without sounding like we have an accent. For example, je parle un peu de français, mais j'ai un accent américain. I speak a little bit of French, but I have an American accent. The development of language tends to follow particular patterns, from babbling to telegraphic speech, which is without the connections and linkage words such as and, the, and finally, children lose the over-regularization that is characterized by this early speech. Over-regularization is the tendency to use a particular syntax rule in cases where there's an exception to that rule. So this tends to demonstrate that we learn rules about language rather than particular pieces of it at one time. Adolescence is a socially defined period of development that lasts from puberty until adulthood. There are varying definitions of what constitutes adulthood, but perhaps the one most commonly used today is when one moves out of one's parents' basement. During adolescence, the connections in the brain are refined, and this process is not fully complete until approximately the mid-20s. One of the last areas of the brain to complete those connections is the frontal cortex, which is involved in things like reasoning and impulse control. Prior to this, the motivational and emotional parts of the brain are fully developed. So one of the challenges of adolescence is to limit the immediate rewards that the limbic system wants before the cognitive impulse control centers are fully developed. The psychologist Erik Erikson describes a series of 8 stages of psychosocial development. In each stage, there is a crisis or a conflict to be resolved. During adolescence, the conflict is between identity and role confusion. That is, what am I going to be when I grow up? How am I going to define myself? What kind of person am I going to be? Trying on different identities at this time is a normal and healthy part of adolescent development. Another type of development that occurs across the lifespan is moral development. Much of the work has been based on Lawrence Kohlberg's 3 levels of moral reasoning. In the pre-conventional level, seen in preschoolers, what is right and wrong depends on the outcome. That is, if I get rewarded for this, it's right. If I get punished for it, it's wrong. During childhood, the conventional level takes over. In this level, what's important is what are the rules, what are the laws, and how do people look at me when I violate those? That is, if there's a normal part of behavior and I violate that and people shun me because of it, I will tend to think that it's wrong. Finally, in adolescence and adulthood, some people reach the post-conventional level, in which decisions about morality depend on abstract principles. That is, the spirit of the law rather than the letter of the law. Adulthood is not all it's cracked up to be. Starting at about the mid-20s, we have a continuous decline in muscle mass, bone density, sensory processes, and speed of cognition. Most people everywhere in the world form some sort of permanent bond with a relationship partner. We tend to call these marriages. People's marriages vary in terms of the expectations and satisfaction that they have. Many people also have children. Children can be the source of great joy, but they are also very expensive and can be stressful. One of the concerns with an aging population is the development of cognitive disorders such as dementia. The most common cause of dementias in the elderly is Alzheimer's disease. But notice that the great majority of people do not develop this disease.